The words chanted in her head like a curse as she rushed up the stone staircase, skirt held tightly in one hand to keep herself from tripping. Her heart pounded, not just from the exertion but also from the thought of what would happen if she were caught lacking. The guard standing outside the king's chambers gave her a look, that blank look that they look like robots, before stepping aside to push the heavy doors open. She swallowed hard, nodded once in thanks, and stepped inside. The air in his room always carried a different aura, as if the walls themselves knew who they belonged to. Everything was perfectly in its place, too perfect, almost suffocatingly so. The heavy curtains let only a sliver of sunlight filter. She didn't pay much attention to the sunlight. Her hands moved automatically, a month of habit guiding her as she started her work. First, she dusted. Then, she straightened the bed he slept in, his scent was still present in the sheets. She smoothed the blanket over the mattress. This was the king's room. The king. Jungkook. She loathed him. Well, loathe wasn't strong enough to capture the knot that tightened in her chest whenever she thought of him. It wasn't just his position or the fact that he ruled over this kingdom, the kingdom holding her people hostage. It was him. His piercing eyes, always watching. The way they saw through her, through everything she tried to hide. His mouth was weapon, always asking the most infuriating questions whenever they crossed paths, like he really saw her, when all she wanted was to disappear. Or maybe she was hallucinating. She shook her head, she has work to do, and she needed to finish before he returned from breakfast with his family. The last thing she needed was to be caught in here, alone, with him. The sound of footsteps outside the door snapped her out of her thoughts. Her heart jumped into her throat, her hands clutching the fabric of the mattress. No, no, no. He couldn't be back already. She wasn't done yet. She glanced toward the door, expecting it to burst open. And for the first time that morning, she prayed. Not to the gods of this kingdom, they had taken enough from her, but to whatever power might listen. Please, not now. Please, not him. But of course, her luck is bad. Because if she was lucky, she wasn't stuck in this palace. The door opened and the presence filled the entire room. Of course, it was him. Who else would it be? The man who seemed to have a sixth sense for catching her off guard. He was dressed in his usual regal attire, black trousers, a fitted white shirt, and a dark coat that fitted his perfect broad shoulders. His hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place, and his jawline, his sharp jawline looked like it had been carved by the gods themselves. It was maddening. How could someone look so perfect all the time? Even the way that he stood, with his hands clasped behind his back, it screams power and control. He was again staring at her with those dark, annoyingly captivating eyes. You are still here. Heat crawled up the back of her neck, but she kept her face neutral as she clutched the pillow tightly. I was just finishing, Your Majesty. And she hate calling him Your Majesty, mostly she call him that to mock him, but he doesn't need to know that. He raised an eyebrow, doesn't seem like just finishing. Of course, he had to comment. Why are you late today? Here we go again with the interrogation. I was busy in the kitchen, helping Nora. The kitchen, he interrupted her, he loves doing that. I thought you did not know anything about cooking. So what purpose could you possibly serve there? Her teeth grinding against each other. Oh, so he remembered. Still, she remembered too. Almost 1.5 months ago, the day he gave out responsibilities to the girls who worked here, she nearly been assigned to the kitchens. But when she, in all her honesty, admitted she didn't know the first thing about cooking, he decided to give her this task instead. Cleaning his chambers. A punishment, no doubt. How she wished she had listened to her mother's nagging when she told her to learn basic cooking skills. If she had, perhaps she would have been miles away from him, safely scrubbing pots in some hidden corner of the castle rather than face him every day. I do know how to wash dishes. Since Eric is ill today, I was merely lending a hand. He narrowed his eyes, trying to decide if she was lying or not. Not that it mattered. He already made up his mind about her the first day he saw her. She opened her stupid mouth, not that she regret, maybe sometimes, in front of him, cursing at him, calling him every name while the guards held her back, trying to silence her. But still she was another name on the long list of hostages he held under his thumb.
Yeah.
Hostage, her people are hostage here. In his kingdom. Under his command. And she hates him. Hate him from the bottom of her heart, the depths of her lungs, and every corner of her soul. May I remind you, the responsibility given to you is more important than any other thing. I won't ever happen again, Your Majesty. She said, her jaw ached from how hard that she was grinding her teeth. Great, he said, now, what are you waiting for? Continue your work. Since you are already late, you might as well prove you are capable of completing it. He always knew how to get under her skin, how to twist the dagger just enough to make her seethe. Instead, she turned silently and headed toward the wardrobe to take his outfit out for the day, eager to avoid another round of his questions. Opening the grand wardrobe, she carefully picked out his suit. Everything needed to match, his coat, trousers, shirt, even the cufflinks. She eyed the collection of clothes with disdain. She couldn't help but wonder what it must be like to live like this, to have everything handed to you on a silver platter. To have so much power that you could destroy lives without a second thought. She turned back to give him the suit, only to find him standing in the same location, his piercing eyes fixated on her. He wasn't being subtle about it. His black eyes studying her, watching every movement as if she were some alien doing a stupid deed. It made her skin crawl. Ignoring his gaze, she walked toward the bed to place the suit. She didn't speak, didn't look at him, if she could just get through this quietly. I don't want to wear that today, his voice stopped her in tracks. She turned back to him, eyebrows twitching. Pardon? I said, I don't want to wear that. She glanced down at the suit she carefully selected. It matches perfectly with. I don't care, he cut her off smoothly. Choose another. She swallowed the fire rising in her chest and returned to the wardrobe. She picked out another set, just as perfect. This time, a navy coat with silver embellishments. Surely this would work. When she presented it to him, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes scanning it with exaggerated slowness. He taps a finger against his chin. No, not this one. It doesn't feel fitting. Today. She clenched her fist behind the fabric. Then perhaps Your Majesty could tell me what you wish to wear. I've already given you the responsibility. Surely, you're capable of making such a simple decision. She returned to the wardrobe, biting the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted blood. She wished it was his blood. Another outfit. This one darker, more formal, with little gold embroidery. She laid it out for him without a word. He hummed, this time stepping closer to inspect the buttons. No, not gold. Something simpler. Silver, perhaps. Another outfit. This one darker, more formal, with little gold embroidery. She laid it out for him without a word. He hummed, this time stepping closer to inspect the buttons. No, not gold. Something simpler. Silver, perhaps. She nearly snapped the hanger in half. Of course. By the time she fetched the fourth outfit, her hands were trembling from anger. She placed it on the bed and stepped back, determined to keep her mouth shut this time. He looked at it, then at her. Yes. This will do. She released a breath, resisting the urge to throw the entire wardrobe at him. Shall I go, Your Majesty? She asked with fake sweetness. Sure, he turns his attention to inspect the room. She took that as her cue and turned, hand gripping the door handle. Freedom. Was mere inches away when his voice called out behind her again, you're leaving your cloth behind. Her eyes narrowing as she scanned the room for what he was referring to. It didn't take long for her to spot it, her dusting cloth lying on the table near the window. By all the devils in hell, she took a deep breath, releasing the door handle before turning to take it. She feel like grabbing the cloth and tossing it at his perfect face. Instead, she snatched the cloth from the table and spun on her heel. She didn't bother sparing him another glance as she marched back to the door, throwing it open with perhaps a bit more force than necessary, and without waiting for another word, she stepped out, clutching the offending cloth tightly in her fist. Like it was his royal neck. Glaring at the pot shall not make it boil faster, Nora, her only friend in this forsaken place, said. Nora was a cook, assigned to the kitchen, and always come here after her duties were done. She blinked. Huh? What troubles you today? There's only one man, she said, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. Nora chuckled. Again? Pray tell, what did the king do this time to vex you so? Nothing new. As always, he found fault in my every move. I cannot so much as breathe without his nitpicking. I grow weary of it, Nora. She shook her head. Thou must endure it, What other choice does you have? Nora sprinkled some salt into the stew, then handed her the ladle. Here, taste this for me. I'm not in the mood. Said. Rolling her eyes, she dipped the ladle in and tasted the broth herself. Her face scrunched up. The spice is wanting. Pass me the jar there. A wicked thought crossed her mind as she handed her the spice jar. Mayhap you should add a touch of poison. Especially for the king's plate. I would dearly love to never see his face again. Nora's eyes widened in horror as she slapped her hand over her mouth. Hold your tongue, she hissed, looking around the kitchen to make sure no one was nearby. Pulled her hand away. What? It was a joke. Do you have a wish for both of us to be hanged in the public? If anyone hear such words, we would surely meet our end. Swallowed hard as the image of herself hanging from a rope flashed in her mind. The tight noose, the crowd gathered to watch. She shook her head vigorously to rid herself of the thought. I am not afraid to die. Be that as it may, Nora said, narrowing her eyes at her. I, for one, cherish my life far too much. I have not yet known the joys of marriage, nor have I seen the world beyond this cursed palace. As long as we remain hostages here, I doubt either of us will ever find love nor freedom. It is one of the many reasons I want to escape this place. Nora sighed. We should be grateful, at least, that we do not rot in the dungeons like the others. His Majesty was kind enough to spare the women and grant us work. There are far worse fates than this. Nora wasn't wrong. Out of the 17 villagers taken hostage, only 7 of us women were assigned tasks within the palace. The other 10 who happened to be men were still rotting in the dark, filthy dungeon up beneath the castle. It feels no different from punishment. Spoke. Nora didn't say anything afterward, a sad reality falling on both of them. The reality of their stolen freedom. Hands moved as she dusted the small vase off. It's been 59 days doing all this and now she is used to everything. She doesn't like dusting, sweeping, much, but in her hometown, she used to help her mother. Now this? This she never thought she would be forced upon to take responsibility of king. Talking about king, her luck wasn't with her today too, this time from the morning since she woke up. First, she hadn't done her breakfast yet. And this was more important than breakfast because she doesn't want to go through another round of questions. But how could she escape from him? Because she encountered him directly in his room. She found him in his bed, with the letters spread on his bed, reading papers after paper. He should be in his study room for this, but no, he has to sit here and work. But from the past 7 minutes she is here, he hasn't spared her a glance. Not that I wanted him to, of course. His brown coat was discarded on a chair nearby, and his white shirt had the first 2 buttons undone, exposing the strong column of his neck. His sleeves were rolled up, showing the veins on his forearms as he flipped through the pages of a letter. She ignored him, focusing instead on her task. The faster she cleaned, the sooner she could leave. From the corner of her eye, she saw him shift slightly. Leave this, his deep voice suddenly broke the silence, startling her so much I nearly dropped the inkpot. She blinked, turning to face him. His eyes were still glued to the papers in his hands, as though he couldn't be bothered to actually look at her. Prepare a bath for me. She opened her mouth to reply, then closed it again. Did he think I was some servant for his whims and comforts? Well, technically, I was. But that didn't mean I had to like it. Yes, she placed the dusting cloth on the desk and made her way toward the door. I need it ready in 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Did he think drawing a bath was simple? Instead, she left the room. The bath chamber was massive. The circular tub at the center was carved out of polished stone, deep enough to hold several people. Warm steam rose as she leaned over the edge, carefully scattering rose petals into the bath. She added sprigs of lavender, faint purple buds releasing a soothing aroma. The oils came next, one with a musky sandalwood scent. She poured a few drops of each into the water, watching as the ripples carried the silky liquid across the surface. She couldn't help but smile as she worked. The scents reminded her of the garden back in the village. It was her favorite place. It had every kind of flower. She used to spend hours there, tending to the plants, watering them, and watching them bloom, letting their scents wrap around her. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was mine. The thought made her smile. Those were simpler times, happier times. Sometimes she wondered if she ever feels that kind of peace again. She touched one of the rose petals floating on the water. It was beautiful. The only beautiful thing she found here. She was so engrossed in the sight of the bath that she didn't hear the door open behind her. So that's what's taking you so long. His smooth baritone voice startled her so badly that she nearly lost her balance. She turned, seeing him standing there, tall and majestic, his dark eyes fixed on her with that hard-to-read expression he always wore. I was just finishing up. She quickly got up to her feet, but, of course, luck was never on her side, never. The moment she stood up, the corner of her dress caught in her own shoes, the ridiculously long dress they made them wear, and before she knew it, she was falling, straight into the water. The splash echoed as she fell, drenching not just her but the flowers, the edges of the bath, and likely some of the floor as well. The hot water had her gasping, but she just froze there, eyes squeezed shut, mortified beyond belief. Praying for the earth to open up and swallow her whole. Maybe if I just stay still. If I pretend to be dead, he'll leave, and I can drown in peace, and avoid facing the humiliation. Yes, that sounded like a plan, but her plan was short-lived. The water's not that deep. I'm certain you can manage to come out on your own. She groaned internally, still refusing to open her eyes. She could feel the heat crawling all the way to her toes. Maybe she could drink the water, every last drop, and drown herself. That would be less embarrassing. But, of course, he wasn't done. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to take a bath with me. Her eyes snapped open, and she retrated because her eyes burned. What? Forgive me, he said, I didn't realize the bath was prepared for two. She finally got up, just her head above the water. But caught the sight of him standing near the edge of the tub. Her heart stopped as she saw him tug his white shirt over his head. Good heavens, she whispered in horror, spinning around so fast she nearly splashed herself in the face again before she sees something else. Her eyes were wide to the size of saucers as she stared hard at the marble tiles in front of her. You didn't want to come out, he said calmly, like stripping in front of girls is normal for him. Well, maybe it is. Figured you wanted to share the bath with me. That was it. She shot out of the water, back still turned to him, her wet dress clinging to her uncomfortably. She was halfway to storming out of the room when his voice stopped her. You might want to stop and dry yourself first, he called out lazily. Or, of course, if you want people to think things, you can walk out like that. She froze, turning her head enough to look over her shoulder. What things? It was the wrong move. The absolute worst move. Because the moment she turned, she saw him standing there, shirtless, his godly made sculpted chest practically mocking her. Her eyes were practically put socket, and she whipped back around, heat flooding her face. Every inch of her burned with embarrassment. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst right out of her chest. You know better. She heard a faint splash of water behind her, and her stomach got twisted in panic. Better know what? She asked, half afraid of the answer. When he didn't answer, she finally gathered the courage to turn again. She found him reclining in the bath, his eyes closed, his head resting comfortably against the stone edge. Just his head and neck were visible, but that didn't make the situation any less infuriating. Her mortification reached new heights as she realizes. Is he naked? Of course, he's naked. He's taking a bath, and she is standing here like a fool. He opened his eyes then, catching her frozen in place. His gaze raked over her, taking in her soaking wet dress, which clung to her like a second skin. His expression didn't change, but she swore she saw something in his dark eyes. When his gaze met hers, he smiled. Not that kind of smile. The smile like he is mocking her. Thought you possessed more sense than this. He leaned back as if he owned the entire kingdom. Well, technically, he did, but that wasn't the point. What nonsense are you speaking of now? What do you think people will say when a girl walks out of the king's bathing chambers, dripping wet and looking, well, like that? She gasped, as she finally realized, her dead brain finally working, but now the realization was as clear as daylight. Her arms wrapped tighter around herself, her wet dress clinging to her like ivy to stone. Have you no shame at all? Your Majesty. She spat out and he simply shrugged, closing his eyes back. Dry yourself before you catch a chill, unless you have a change of mind. That was her breaking point. She turned on her heel, grabbing a towel from a nearby rack as she stormed toward the door. She swore she heard a low chuckle, or maybe she was imagining as the door closed behind. She hated him. She hated him with every fiber of her being. Vile wretch. She wiped her face from the towel. May the heavens curse his wretched tongue. YN shouldn't be standing here. That much she knew. This part of the palace forbidden to people like her, servants, hostages, those without noble blood running through their veins. And yet, she was standing there gazing upon the vast expanse. The palace grounds stretched far and wide, bathed in the golden morning light. She could see the towering walls in the distance, the ones that separated this grand kingdom from the world beyond. Her chest tightened at the sight. How she longed to step past those walls, to walk freely as she once did in her homeland. Her heart ached at the memories, when her feet weren't bound to stone floors, when her days weren't spent serving a kingdom that was never meant to be hers. She rarely visited the king's city back in her homeland. It was far. The last time she went, she was a child, barely tall enough to see past the carts of merchants, selling spiced meats and honeyed treats. She barely remembered what it looked like, or as cold as the stone walls of this palace. Did it smell of fresh bread, roasted meat, and the sweetness of ripened fruits, like the markets back home? Was there greenery? There must be. She wanted to know. She wanted to see. She wanted, busy daydreaming about escaping this palace? She flinched, the voice far too close. Her heart stumbled, and she turned, only to find the nightmare standing before her. The king. He was dressed in the finest black and gold robes, giving an effortless authority that set her teeth on edge. There was not a single trace of emotion on his face. Do you not have any other work than sneaking up on me? She crossed her arm, lifting her chin up. A sharp intake of breath sounded beside him, and that's when she realized he was not alone. Xiao Jin Huan. The king's most trusted man, his right hand. Watch your tone, Jin Huan warned, you are addressing the king of Goguryeo, not a common man. Her lips parted, and she looked at the king, who appeared unbothered. Apologize to your majesty now, he spoke again, and she blinked. Why is Jungkook not saying anything? He never got angry before, even when she cursed him on his face. Though she knows she should respect the king, but her hate wouldn't let her respect someone like him. Swallowing her pride, she lowered her head and bent into a bow. I'm sore, you can leave. His words cut off her apology, and she straightened, ready to step away, but when she glanced up, Jungkook's eyes weren't on her. He was looking at his trusted man. Jin Huan bowed slightly before stepping away without any question, leaving them alone in the vast courtyard. She shifted, uneasy under the weight of his stares. You didn't answer my question, he spoke at last. She blinked. What question? His head tilted slightly. Oh, that, she forced a chuckle. I wasn't planning on escaping. A pause. But I do wish to. So that I never have to lay my eyes upon this cursed kingdom or its people again. She emphasized the last word. She wanted him to know, she wasn't just talking about the palace, about the life of a hostage. She was talking about him. When she didn't move, he glanced back over his shoulder, worry not. I am not taking you to the dungeon, yet. She sucked in a sharp breath and hesitated only for a moment before finally not following him. Where was he taking her? Why are we here? That she pinched her nose, regretting ever following him. The smell of the stable was not enough to make her gag, the mix of hay, sweat, and, dear heavens, horse dung fill her nose. She wrinkled her nose in disgust. She liked horses, but their dirt, not so much. Your duty for the day, finally, he turned to her, his expression blank. Is to clean the stables. She froze. Blinked. Then snapped her head toward him so fast it nearly gave her whiplash. Pardon?